What happens when a CEO walks into his own warehouse at night and no one knows who he is? It started with numbers. Jackson Fuller sat in his office staring at the weekly reports. Warehouse 11, the smallest and newest of the 11 storage locations his father had built from the ground up, had been steadily underperforming for months. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough to bother him. There were no complaints, no customer issues, no staff resignations, just a quiet dip. A slow leak. He had inherited the business 2 years ago after his father died. And while Jackson had grown up watching the man run things with a sharp eye and even sharper tongue, he always hated how removed his dad became from the people on the floor. Jackson promised himself he'd do it differently. But lately, emails had replaced conversations. Reports had replaced visits. He wanted to see the place, not as the CEO, as someone invisible, so he made a decision. He'd go undercover as a night shift trainee. Warehouse 11 ran 24 hours. The night shift was smaller, just a few people moving stock, securing the property, logging deliveries. Perfect. He'd go in, keep his head down, and see what was really going on. He grew out his beard for 2 weeks, dyed it darker. Bought a pair of cheap steel-toed boots and a second-hand hoodie with a faded college logo. He even added a fake name tag, Josh. No one at Warehouse 11 had ever met him. Most of the staff had been hired by the district manager, and the site manager had only been there for 5 months. It was the perfect setup. He arrived at 9:45, 15 minutes early. The warehouse sat on the edge of a quiet industrial strip, boxed in by chain-link fencing and the hum of distant trucks. The air smelled like dust and engine oil. A short, tired-looking man in a flannel shirt unlocked the side door and let him in. "You Josh?" the man asked. "Yeah," Jackson nodded, keeping his voice low. "New hire, night training." "All right." The man scratched his neck. "Name's Lewis, I'll show you around." Lewis was the night supervisor. Mid-50s, thinning hair, deep lines under his eyes. The man moved like someone who'd been doing the same thing for too long. He didn't smile, but he wasn't rude either, just drained. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit. Bare concrete floors, tall shelves, a faint echo of movement. A younger guy named Trent was logging inventory by hand at a workstation, earbuds in. A woman named Carla was sorting damaged goods into bins. That was it. 3 people. Jackson blinked. "Is this the whole night crew?" "Usually 4, Lewis said, "but we've been down a guy for 2 weeks. HR's dragging their feet." Jackson frowned. 2 weeks? Why not fill in with daytime staff? Lewis gave him a look. "They won't touch night shifts. Pays the same." That didn't sit right, but he nodded and followed Lewis to the security station at the rear of the building. It was a small room with a wall of old monitors showing grainy black and white footage from different corners of the warehouse. "This is Marvin's post," Lewis said. "He's the night guard. You'll probably meet him later." Jackson looked around. "He works alone?" "Yeah, been here almost 10 years. Doesn't talk much, but he shows up." He didn't see anyone in the security room, but Lewis waved it off. "He's probably walking the perimeter. He does that every hour, real serious about it." The night passed slow. Jackson was assigned to help Carla with bin sorting. She didn't ask many questions, just handed him broken items and told him which pile they went in. Around midnight, she stretched her back and muttered, "Wish Marvin would come in here. He always brings snacks." "Snacks?" "Yeah," she said. "He makes these little peanut butter things. Keeps us going." Trent popped in an hour later holding a plastic wrapper. "Marv left these in the break room." Jackson took one. It was a homemade protein bar, not much to it: oats, peanut butter, some kind of seeds, but it hit the spot. He asked, "He does this every night?" "Pretty much," Trent shrugged. "He's the only reason this shift doesn't fall apart." Just before 2, Jackson finally met him. He was coming back from a perimeter check, flashlight swinging at his side. Marvin was tall, mid-60s maybe, with salt and pepper hair and a limp in his left leg. His eyes were sharp, though, alert. "New face," Marvin said, eyeing Jackson. "Josh," he said, holding out a hand. Marvin shook it. "Welcome to the graveyard shift." He didn't say much after that, but Jackson noticed the way he moved. Quick to check locks, careful with the cameras. He even typed out a report by hand after doing a round. No one asked him to by 4. Jackson was exhausted. Marvin, on the other hand, was still walking the aisles, checking shelves, picking up loose tape, even shutting off a fan someone left running. At 5:15, Jackson finally asked Lewis, "How many hours does Marvin work?" Lewis looked up from his desk. "Officially, 8, but he gets here early." "Leaves late. Does he get paid overtime?" Lewis gave a dry laugh. "Man, he's salaried, makes what? 32 grand a year," Jackson froze. 32? "Yeah, he's been stuck at that since before I got here, asked for a raise once, district said no budget." Jackson didn't say anything. Just nodded and stepped outside into the cold morning air. 32,000. For a man who worked alone, kept the place running, made snacks for his coworkers, and walked with a limp every hour on the hour. Jackson didn't sleep that day. He just stared at the ceiling, wondering how he'd let this happen, wondering how many other Marvins were out there. The next night, Jackson returned just before 10, the same hoodie, same boots, same quiet introduction. Lewis barely looked up when he buzzed him in, distracted by a clipboard and a half-eaten apple. The air inside felt colder, heavier somehow, like the concrete itself held onto fatigue. Jackson scanned the security feed over Lewis's shoulder. Marvin's station was empty again. "Out on rounds?" he asked. Lewis nodded absently. "Probably. He does his own thing. Never late, never skips." Jackson headed toward the back aisles where Carla was already unpacking a fresh pallet of returns. She looked up briefly, tossed him a box cutter, and went back to work without a word. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the kind of silence that grows when people stop expecting things to get better. At 11, Marvin walked in through the loading bay, wiping his hands with a rag. He'd apparently been helping the delivery driver fix a broken strap on a freight crate. No one had asked him to. Jackson watched as he moved to the break room and placed a small Tupperware container on the counter. Carla wandered in a minute later and picked it up with a quiet thanks. Marvin didn't say anything. Jackson followed him to the far side of the warehouse where the HVAC units buzzed against the back wall. Marvin was crouched, adjusting the vent casing with a screwdriver. "Is that part of your rounds?" Jackson asked, kneeling beside him. "Nah, this thing's been rattling. Blows hot air if it gets loose." He tightened the screws and stood with a slow exhale. "Nobody notices unless it breaks completely. Figured I'd stay ahead of it." Jackson leaned against the wall. "How long you been here?" "Too long to count," Marvin said, brushing dust off his knees. "Started when this place was just concrete and promises. They didn't even have the dock doors installed yet." "You ever think about retiring?" Marvin gave him a look. "You think I'd be walking around here at midnight if I could afford to stay home?" Jackson didn't know what to say to that. There was no bitterness in the man's voice, just dry fact. His eyes drifted to the shelves, then the far corners of the building where shadows pooled. "You ever feel like they notice what you do?" Jackson asked. Marvin shrugged. "They used to, back when Dan ran this place. He'd check in, ask how things were going. Haven't seen anyone from corporate in over a year now." Jackson kept his face still. "You ever try reporting issues, asking for help?" "I did," Marvin said. "Got told we're leaning out operations. Translation, do more with less." There was no anger in him, just a quiet patience, the kind that comes from years of being ignored. Around midnight, Jackson ended up back near the receiving dock where Trent was struggling with a pallet jack. One of the wheels had jammed, and he was prying it with a crowbar, swearing under his breath. Jackson crouched beside him. "Need a hand?" "Yeah, if you can find another jack. This one's toast." Trent wiped sweat from his forehead. "We've only got 2, and one's been busted for weeks." "Has anyone reported it?" Trent laughed. "Man, we've emailed maintenance like 3 times. They sent back some form letter about backlogged requests. Lewis doesn't push it, so nothing changes." Jackson stood and looked around. The loading bay had a cracked floor panel near the entrance. One of the overhead lights flickered every few seconds. He hadn't noticed it the night before, but now it felt like more than a nuisance, it was a symptom. He walked toward the tool cage, a locked section near the back where most of the repair gear was stored. Marvin was there already, unlocking the gate with a ring of keys. "You have access to this?" Jackson asked. "Lewis gave it to me last year. Said I was the only one who didn't lose tools." Inside, the shelves were half empty. A box labeled electrical had nothing but a stripped wire spool and a broken tester. Marvin pulled out a socket wrench set and a replacement wheel. He handed them to Jackson. "You planning to fix that jack?" "Trent is." Marvin nodded. "He'll need a punch tool. Bearings on those things are welded stiff." As Jackson passed him the tool, he asked, "You ever train anyone?" "Used to," Marvin said, "but they stopped asking. Said it wasn't part of my job description." Back at the dock, Jackson handed Trent the tools. The younger man looked surprised. "Where'd you find these?" "Marvin helped me." Trent raised an eyebrow. "That guy knows more about this place than our last 3 supervisors combined." By 2, the warehouse had gone quiet again. Carla was eating in the break room, headphones on. Lewis was slumped in his chair, half asleep in the office. Jackson walked the perimeter with Marvin. They passed a loading bay where the door was missing a latch. Marvin stopped, knelt, and wedged a piece of metal into the gap. "Temporary fix," he said. "Keeps the wind out." Jackson stared at the door. "You ever think about asking for a maintenance crew?" "I have," Marvin said. "They sent a guy once. Took pictures. Nothing changed." They moved on. Marvin's limp was more noticeable this time, but he didn't slow down. Jackson watched him scan the aisles, check the emergency lights, note a loose cable near a shelving unit. "You always this thorough?" Jackson asked. Marvin gave him a tired glance. "You ever work somewhere where one mistake meant someone went home in an ambulance?" "No." "Well," he said, "that's what this place is. One bad pallet, one cracked strap, one person not paying attention. I'd rather lose sleep than see someone get crushed." Jackson didn't respond. He just followed in silence. At 4:30, Marvin returned to the security station and began typing out a report, not on a computer, on a lined yellow pad. His handwriting was sharp and efficient. Jackson leaned over. "You do this every night, every shift. I keep records. There's no digital system. Nobody reads them, but I want it on paper anyway. Ever ask for a computer?" They said it wasn't necessary. Said if I had time to write reports, I wasn't doing enough rounds. The words hit like a slap. Jackson turned away, his jaw tight. At 5:15, he walked back to the break room. Carla had finished her shift and was packing her bag. Trent was asleep, head on the table. Jackson sat beside Marvin, who was sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. "You ever think about quitting?" Marvin shook his head. "I got a daughter in school, some medical bills. If I quit, I lose insurance. Can't risk that." Jackson stared at the floor. "You ever meet the owner?" he asked suddenly. Marvin chuckled. "Nah, heard he was some young guy. Took over after the old man passed. Never seen him, never heard from him." "You think he knows what goes on here?" Marvin looked at him, really looked. Then he glanced away. "I think he probably gets reports that make this place look better than it is." Jackson didn't speak. The air felt too thick. At 5:45, Marvin stood and stretched, wincing slightly. "You did all right tonight," he said. "Not everyone makes it through their first week." Jackson nodded slowly. "You really care about this place?" he asked. "I care about the people in it," Marvin replied. "Buildings don't matter, people do." Jackson watched him walk away, the limp a little heavier now, the silence louder than it had any right to be. He stayed sitting there long after the others left, staring at nothing. Something deep inside him had shifted, and he knew there was no going back. Jackson didn't clock in for the next shift. He walked through the front doors at noon the following day, clean-shaven, wearing a pressed jacket and real leather shoes. No hoodie, no name tag, no pretending. The receptionist at the regional office barely looked up. She handed him a folder of site performance summaries, not realizing he'd already lived them. He walked past her without a word and headed straight down the hallway to the district manager's office. The door was open. Kyle sat behind a modern desk, tapping at a keyboard, phone wedged between shoulder and ear. He gave Jackson an absent nod as he ended the call. Didn't expect you today, Kyle said, leaning back in his chair. I thought you were flying to Phoenix. Jackson pulled the office door shut behind him and sat across from him. I went to Warehouse 11 this week, night shift, Kyle blinked, to observe. No, I worked it 4 nights, second week of the month. No one knew who I was. Kyle sat up straighter. Why? Jackson ignored the question. How long have you had oversight of that site? About 6 months. Before that it was, I don't care who had it before you. Kyle crossed his arms. Look, if this is about the numbers, I already filed an action plan. We've been trending, this isn't about the numbers. Kyle frowned. Then what? Jackson leaned forward. Why is the facility understaffed? Kyle hesitated. We've had some turnover. It's hard to get night shift coverage. People don't want those hours. Why haven't we offered night differential pay? Kyle looked uncomfortable. That's not in the current compensation structure. We decide the compensation structure. Well, sure, but it's consistent across the board. Offering extra for one site sets a precedent. Jackson nodded slowly. And who approved the $32,000 salary for Marvin? Kyle hesitated again. I mean, that's the standard for site security. He's hourly, he's not hourly, he's salaried. You signed off on it. I'd have to check the file. I checked it. Jackson's voice was calm, flat. He hasn't had a raise in over 6 years. He's logged more hours than anyone else on record. He's been doing maintenance work, safety checks, and inventory monitoring outside his role. He's training people. He's writing manual reports because no one gave him a digital system. Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it. Jackson stood. From now on, I want a separate log of night shift incidents, safety maintenance, and staffing gaps. I want Marvin's salary increased by $15,000 immediately and retroactive pay for the last fiscal year. I want the broken pallet jack replaced and the HVAC serviced within 48 hours. And I want a night shift pay differential instituted across all sites, starting with Warehouse 11. Kyle stood too, his expression tight. That's going to affect the entire compensation model. We'll have to run projections. You'll do it today. Kyle looked like he wanted to argue but didn't. Jackson turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, he said without looking back. You're stepping down from district oversight, effective immediately. Kyle's voice sharpened. Are you firing me? You're not fired. You're just not managing people anymore. He left without another word. By 4 that afternoon, he was back at Warehouse 11, this time in broad daylight. Lewis wasn't there. Day shift had their own supervisor, a young woman named Daria who'd never met him before. When he introduced himself this time with his real name, her face went pale. I didn't know you were coming. I'm not here to audit you. I need to speak with Marvin. She frowned. He doesn't come in until 8. I know, I want to be here when he does. She offered to show him around. He declined. Instead, he walked the warehouse alone. The same cracked floor panel, the same flickering light, the same feeling that no one had been listening. He found the yellow legal pad in the security room. The handwriting was still there, lines of neatly recorded notes. Times, door checks, equipment issues. Small things but consistent. He flipped through the sheets, reading every word. At 8:45, Marvin arrived. He stepped inside, holding a thermos in one hand and a canvas lunch bag in the other. He paused when he saw Jackson standing by the monitors. You're not Josh, Marvin said quietly. Jackson turned. No, I'm Jackson Fuller. Marvin didn't react the way Jackson expected. No anger, no embarrassment. Just a long, steady look. You're the owner. I am. Marvin walked over, set his bag down, and took a sip from his thermos. You spent 4 nights out here, he said. Why? Because I didn't trust the reports anymore. Marvin nodded slowly. And now I know we've been failing you. Marvin's eyes didn't leave his. You think I stayed here because I liked being ignored? No, Jackson said. I think you stayed because you don't know how to quit on people. Marvin sat in the chair by the monitors, his knee cracking slightly. He didn't flinch. I didn't expect to see change, he said. I just wanted the place to hold together. Jackson pulled a folded envelope from his coat and placed it on the desk. That's a formal contract increase, immediate raise, back pay, health premium adjustment. And starting next week, you're moving into a new role. Night Operations Safety Lead. You'll have 2 direct reports and authority to enforce maintenance protocols. Marvin didn't move. You've earned it, Jackson said. Marvin looked at the envelope. What happens next? I'm staying involved. You'll have a direct line to my office, not through layers of middle management, no more being invisible. Marvin's voice was quiet. And the others? They're getting raises too, Trent, Carla. The entire night crew were implementing a shift differential and fixing the equipment issues. There's a new supervisor starting next week, someone who respects the work being done here. Marvin finally leaned back, exhaling slow. It's about time, he said. Jackson gave a faint nod. Yeah, it is. The rest of the crew arrived over the next hour. Carla blinked when she saw Jackson in the security room, then stiffened when she realized who he was. Trent dropped his backpack in the break room and stood still, confused. Jackson walked out to the floor. I don't want a big speech, he said, but I owe you all an apology. They stared at him. I thought I understood what this company needed. I thought I could fix things from a distance, but I was wrong. You've been carrying more than your share, and starting tonight that changes. He handed each of them a sealed envelope. Neither Trent nor Carla said anything at first. Then Carla opened hers, eyes scanning the paper. Her breath hitched, barely audible. Trent blinked. You serious? Dead serious, Jackson said. You've been overlooked. That stops now. Carla stepped forward. Are you going to do this for the other sites too? Yes, Jackson said. But I started here because you were the ones being ignored the longest. Trent rubbed the back of his neck. You came in here, worked next to us, just to see it for yourself. I didn't trust what I was being told anymore. I needed to see the truth. Marvin stood from his chair, the envelope still sealed in his hand. You saw it, he said. Now don't forget it. Jackson looked at him. I won't. He stayed for the next few hours, not as a boss, not as a visitor, just as someone who finally understood. He helped move a few boxes, tightened a loose bolt on a shelf, talked with Carla about her nursing classes, asked Trent about the new forklift certification he was studying for, and when he left, just before dawn, Marvin was still at his post, steady and alert. The building hadn't changed. But everything else had. 3 weeks had passed since Jackson's visit to the night shift. Warehouse 11 no longer felt like a forgotten outpost on the company's ledger. It now had a dedicated maintenance team rotating through twice a week, a restructured night schedule with proper coverage, and a newly installed internal feedback system that didn't funnel everything through layers of approval before action was taken. But none of those changes mattered unless they held. Jackson returned unannounced, this time during the overlap between second and third shifts. The sun had set, but the lights inside the warehouse were bright, all of them functional. The cracked floor panel had been replaced. The pallet jack was gone, swapped out for 2 newer models. A laminated safety checklist hung in the break room near the water cooler, with initials marked from each day of the past 2 weeks. He spotted Marvin near the loading dock, clipboard in hand, talking to a younger man in a reflective vest. They were reviewing a restock procedure, the younger man nodding while Marvin pointed to a diagram taped to the crate. Jackson waited until their conversation wrapped up, then stepped forward. How's the new role? Jackson asked. Marvin didn't look surprised to see him. Busy, but it fits. I'm not used to people listening when I speak. You earned that, Jackson said. I know, Marvin replied. That's what's different. I don't have to prove it every night anymore. They stood near the exit ramp as a truck backed into the bay. Marvin's eyes followed the movement, attentive as ever. The younger man returned with a portable scanner and began the intake process without needing direction. His name's Elijah, Marvin said. Came from Warehouse 6. He asked to transfer here when he heard we had new leadership. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Voluntarily. Apparently, word travels when things get better. Jackson nodded once, then turned his attention to the far end of the warehouse where a new supervisor's office had been set up. The glass wall allowed visibility across the main floor, and inside, a woman in her 30s was reviewing a digital dashboard. She looked up once and waved when she noticed him. He returned the gesture. "That's Nadia," Marvin said. "She doesn't just sit behind the screen. She walks the floor every 2 hours, carries her own gloves." "I met her briefly last week," Jackson said. "She told me she used to manage a fulfillment center for a nonprofit, said this was the first time she's been given full autonomy." "She doesn't waste it," Marvin said. They walked toward the rear storage racks, where Trent was teaching 2 new hires how to operate a lift. He looked up when they approached and gave a short nod. Jackson waited until he finished his sentence before speaking. "How's the training going?" "Better than I expected," Trent said. "It helps when they're not exhausted before the shift even starts. We're rotating crews now, so nobody's pulling 5 nights straight." Jackson noticed the lift had been recently serviced. A sticker near the control panel showed the maintenance log, updated the day before. "Did you request that?" "No," Trent said. "Marvin flagged it. Nadia approved it without hesitation." Jackson glanced at Marvin, who shrugged. "I don't like waiting for something to break," Marvin said. "I already spent too many years watching things fall apart before anyone noticed." Jackson turned to the 2 trainees. Both looked alert, not in the way that comes from nerves, but with the quiet confidence of people who felt supported. He nodded at them, then continued walking with Marvin toward the security room. The monitors had been upgraded. No more black and white fuzz. The new system showed crisp footage from every angle, with motion alerts and real-time logs. A second chair had been added beside the desk, and Jackson noticed a printed schedule pinned to the corkboard. Marvin's new assistant, a part-time security officer named Denny, was covering 4 nights a week. "Denny any good?" Jackson asked. "He's still learning," Marvin said, "but he listens. Doesn't cut corners, that's what matters." They stepped inside. On the desk sat a company-issued tablet logged into the new reporting system. "You still keep the paper log?" Jackson asked. Marvin tapped the tablet. "I write it here now. Took a week to get used to it, but it saves time. Plus, Nadia reads every entry, sends notes back when she has questions." "That's the idea," Jackson said. "Accountability goes both ways." Marvin leaned against the doorframe and looked at him. "You came back to check if we slipped." "I came back to see if the changes were real." "And they are." Marvin nodded once, thoughtful. "You know," he said, "I used to think the company was just too big to care. Thought maybe that's just the trade-off when things grow." "It can be," Jackson admitted, "but it doesn't have to be." Marvin studied him for a moment. "So what made you change?" Jackson thought for a moment before answering. "I saw you fixing a vent that no one else noticed. Making protein bars on your own dime. Writing reports no one asked for. And I realized if someone like you could care that much without recognition, then I could do a lot more with all the recognition I already had." Marvin didn't respond immediately. He walked over to the small fridge beside the desk, opened it, and pulled out a wrapped sandwich. "Denny's idea," he said. "We rotate who stocks the fridge now. Everyone brings something, feels more like a crew." Jackson looked around the room. It was still utilitarian: concrete walls, metal shelves, fluorescent lights, but it no longer felt neglected. It felt lived in, maintained, respected. "You ever think about retiring now?" Jackson asked. Marvin sat down, placed the sandwich on the desk, and looked out the glass toward the warehouse floor. "Not yet," he said. "I want to see this through, make sure it sticks." "It's going to," Jackson said, "but I get it. You built something here." "I didn't build it alone," Marvin said. "But I made sure the foundation didn't crack." They sat in silence for a moment as the steady rhythm of the warehouse continued around them. The soft whir of lifts, the beep of scanners, muted voices trading instructions, all of it ran smoother now, not because someone at the top demanded it, but because people on the floor were finally being heard. Jackson stood up. "I've got to visit another site tomorrow, but I'll be back in a month." "Not undercover this time." Marvin gave a short nod. "You won't need to be." Jackson walked to the exit, passing by Carla near the packing station. She was showing another employee how to organize the outgoing shipment logs on the tablet. She caught his eye and gave a brief wave, not hesitant, not forced, just acknowledgement. He stepped outside into the cool night. The parking lot was better lit now. The security camera above the door followed his movement as it should. Everything was in place, not perfect, but right. And for the first time in a long while, Jackson Fuller didn't feel like he was running a company from behind a desk. He felt like he was leading one.